Bonjour à tous, good afternoon everyone. Nous sommes privilégiés d'avoir avec nous aujourd'hui Ann Soden, avocate émérite, pour nous parler des droits des aînés. We are very fortunate to have with us Ann Soden, lawyer emeritus, to talk about the rights of the older adult. Enjoy the lecture. Thank you so much. Merci.
Okay. I've been working in this field for 25 years. And it was a new and burgeoning field in the United States, but did not exist in Canada. And I brought it to the attention of the Canadian Bar Association. And I then went across the country to every single province and the territories to create a section, a new section of law, as yet developed as an area of law, but a section of law on elder law, the growing number of questions and problems that were being faced and unanswered by people who were aging, not even recognized by many people as being issues that they had or that they could have some rights concerning. Okay? And so now we have about 4,000 people across the country who are involved in different ways through different angles of their practice with matters that address persons who are aging. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful work to do, and certainly every single one of my older clients are very appreciative clients, and they have such resilience and background throughout their lives. They have persevered despite many problems, often many problems that have predeceased their arrival at age 65. What problems they had were problems that were not all of a sudden problems at age 65. They existed before, but we're taking a look at them, a fresh look at some of these conflicts and problems that they have had, and those going forward that they could have. And so what I do every day, 7 days a week, and mainly through my pro bono mobile clinic, is to represent the most vulnerable of people who have no one nor any means to hire a lawyer and would be left aside completely without representation or information, just sidelined. And that is one of our biggest problems that we have. Older persons are not a homogeneous group, and yet we are a tremendous population that's only growing every day. But those people who are healthy and vital and involved in life don't want to hear about the fact that they're aging. Oh, that's somebody 10 years older than I am. So we do not have that composition of strength and numbers to move forward with what I try to do every day, but I am but a drop of water in a huge ocean. Okay? And that is to secure the rights of an older person and strengthen those rights. So that's what I have here in French. Just to start, it's let us embrace getting older, and of course embrace all of our brethren who are without any help. All of us. And the community and socialization is probably one of the biggest and most important things that we can gift to persons who are older, particularly those who are closed behind the doors in institutions and other residences and have no one to give joy and laughter to their lives. My gosh, when I look at this artwork here in this room and say, my gosh, can we not do better for so many people who are just simply alone? And we try to change that. So, embrassons le gris. Okay, so let's try to give life to the gray zone And it is a gray zone because many of the issues are in the gray zone. And how to secure, that is, taking account of the rights and promoting those rights, which I do mainly through mediation, okay? Not running off and sending a lawyer's letter. I often get calls, please, you know, there's this matter of exploitation, there's a matter of abuse, and would you send a lawyer's letter? I said, nope, I never send a lawyer's letter, ever, okay? Never, never, never. That is the worst possible approach to take, is a lawyer's letter, which we call a mise en demeure. You better stop this, or, you know, with a remark like, sans préjudice, without prejudice. What does that invite? Lawyers on the other side, money mounting, instead of just calling a person. And for me, going out and meeting people is number one in everything. Meeting people. I meet my clients, but I let the people who call me know that I am representing an older person who's having difficulties, and thank you for telling me that there is a need. I will call that person. I will see that if that person wants to have some assistance from me. And normally I will go out and meet that person wherever they are, all over Quebec. I treat people all over Quebec. So I'm traveling to Joliette, to Repentigny, to Quebec City. I mean, just in the last week, these are places that I have gone for various different matters. So we want to make sure that the rights of the person are protected, but we do it in a human manner and in the shortest time possible to address these issues. Because why do they come up and how do they come up? As I say, many of them have evolved over a period of time. You're not all of a sudden descending at 65. However, they can be that an incident occurs in the life of the older person that causes an emergency to arrive with great changes in that person's life. And the person is, absolutely unprepared. You may have done a will, you may have put in place a power of attorney, but you were never expected that those would be other than in a drawer in your file and never touched. How do we give effect to these? Okay. And what about all of these problems that you're all of a sudden faced with in the worst time of your life? You're either sick, or you've lost a spouse, or there are these matters that happen, and very often persons are just simply left without any information. They may have a family member who has transmitted information. That information may not be complete, it may not be correct, it may have other reasons for communicating a particular image of the older person that is not valid. And who do they have to stand with them? If they have someone who has given an image of that older person as being necessarily in decline, because that person has been discombobulated in their life because they've lost a spouse and they just really need to just have assistance and support at that point. Not to be considered as incapable, and now therefore the person that they gave a power of attorney to will now execute the mandate of protection. But that happens just about every day, all the time. Or that the person doesn't have enough care or social context at home, and the CLSC is overburdened because of lack of resources, and the person goes to the hospital, is assessed, and told it's now time for you to go into an institution. And if the person says, no, I want to go home, an order of the court is issued that they actually have to go into the institution. So there's another case of situations that I deal with daily, to try to pull the person back from the abyss and have them looked at properly and cared for properly as they are entitled to have. We need a great many more people. Let me just get back to, you've all seen who I am. This background is really just summarizes absolutely everything. We'll go into it in just a little bit, okay? But I've given you an overview already. The older person, as anyone else, has a right to live with dignity, security, and as autonomous beings. Let me tell you what does that mean, because dignity. It's a word that we have, but it's not very clear as to what dignity is. So, I mean, we all know how to dignify persons. It's to elevate that person. But we really, really do not use it very often. And we are now, I mean, there are whole departments in certain universities in the United States that I deal with who have created a whole program on dignity. What does it mean? I mean, really getting to the heart of what dignity is. But here, what I can encapsulate for you is dignity as being one of our human rights, to be treated with dignity. In the case of persons who are older, it is, in fact, to make sure and to work on, because it's far from done, ageism, which is our grounding of many, many of the problems for persons who are older. And I say persons who are older. I never use the word elderly. It's to be banned. It is not politically correct to use the word elderly, yet we hear it every day on television, in magazines, and in newspapers. It is the term that is used. So dignity means that we really have to absolutely abolish and get rid of this notion that older persons are necessarily incapable. That is something that pervades. I remember my father telling me that, he said, I'm so glad when I said that I was going to develop this area because it was so needed. And he said, I am so glad that you are going to do this. My father was a lawyer and a very good businessman, but he was principally at heart a lawyer, and all of his life a lawyer. And so he said, I'm so happy that you are doing this, that you are going to advance a whole new field. I mean, I had no idea of the breadth of it at that point. Because he said, I feel vulnerable. I said, how could you feel vulnerable? He was in his 70s. I said, how could you feel vulnerable? You are a brilliant man. You still are involved in business and everything. He said, because when people look at me, they see an old person. And that has always stayed with me, because there is an image of oldness. People would come to me many times in the past, more recent past, although I started this in my 40s, and say, well, aren't you going to retire? Madame. But I said, no. Why would I ever retire? I mean, as long as I am healthy and competent, I want to always work. I want to die with my boots on. I do not ever want to retire. oh, that is really, really special. But more and more, we have older persons who are living very rich, involved lives, and in whatever they wish to do. It could be that they're retired, but they are full of life, education, exploring many, many matters, but we're still not having the respect. And this ageism is very, very, it's under the radar, but it's very, very, very pervasive. And how do we deal with this? How do we, as a huge population that we are, deal with such a matter of fighting ageism? We can see it alone in the what's happening in the States with this Trump and Biden remarks about they're too old, okay? Or there's a risk of them getting sick or being unable to act, and then of course they have to look at the vice president. Is there a competent vice president? These are all issues that we're going to have to face, okay? And certainly there are very many things that persons who are aging should take stock of. For example, my father at age 80 passed the 80-year-old exam for driving, but he said, I'm not going to drive anymore because I just don't have the same reflexes that I had when I was younger. And I feel that it's just not right for me to drive. Now, that's not everyone, and sometimes you're living in a small area and you're just going to the grocery store and all is fine. But I'm not recommending that necessarily to everyone, but it's the kind of thoughtfulness that you take stock of. And so there are many, many matters that need to be taken account of, but certainly dignity and the raising of this notion of dignity. Where are they being prejudiced? In what fields are they being prejudiced? In the marketplace. You know, persons saying, well, it's time for you to retire. For others to prendre la relève, okay, to replace you because you're too old at this point in time. So certainly it exists still in the marketplace. It exists certainly in housing. We have many, many problems of persons who are, now it's protected by those who are over 70 and who are renting and have been in their place for more than 10 years to have a certain protection of that lease. But there have been a great many situations, some of which have come to me, but I work not in those kind of fields. I usually get someone else who would be really in the area of leasing to deal with these kind of cases, but where there has been a discrimination against the person simply because they have been in their place for a great many years, and of course they're paying at a far lesser amount than somebody who would be coming in fresh and new into this. So the landlord tries to give them grief or difficulty to force them out. And that is certainly a discrimination. And as I say, it has been more recently protected for those who've been 10 years in an apartment building and who are over 70. Attitudes in healthcare settings are a particular problem. There are many cases, unfortunately, that we see where the person is called by their first name. I consider that very, very wrong unless that person is particularly asked and invited, a particular person, to call them by their first name. There is a demeaning approach or a controlling approach that is often being used that is not elevating the person or giving them dignity or including the person, but removing all of their autonomy. I'm in charge here of this is my job and I'm doing it for you. And of course, it just has such a negative effect, and it is ageist in matters. Finally, beyond dignity is security. Security is really the matter of being protected from abuse, which of course includes ageism as one of the abuses, a psychological abuse, but other abuses, whether it's financial or physical, which is very rare, psychological, and in some cases sexual, but that's a very minor one as well. Okay, physical and sexual are very minor. The principal ones are verbal abuse, psychological abuse, and financial abuse, which we call exploitation. Of all the abuses, people would say, oh, well, it's financial abuse because we hear about it all the time. Yes, it's very underreported. So what we hear is by far, far, far less than the actual financial exploitation that goes on every day by persons, principally family members. Family members are the principal perpetrators of financial abuse of older persons. And I'll get to that in a moment as to why that is the case and why it's not reported the case. But the most common of abuses, which again is under the radar, is psychological abuse. The demeaning, the berating, the sort of saying, don't, Mom, you stay aside. We'll make the answers. We will do the things. That kind of diminishment of the person goes on all the time. It's considered for many as just being, I'm just taking care of you. But it's not elevating the person. It's not including the person. It's doing things for the person. So a simple thing such as overprotecting someone who does not want to be protected is immoral. It's immoral. It may not be something that you could take to the court or accuse the person of, but it's a violation of that person's rights. We can go from that all the way down a long continuum to what is criminal, which would be a fraud or taking money from someone who has not consented to it. But what happens when persons do consent? And who are the people who consent to allow themselves to be victims of abuse and exploitation? Family. Okay? Family who come to say on a countless number of cases. This year, I have 6 cases. Please come. I have 6 cases of adult children who have either asked for a transfer of property to them by a family member or money transferred to them, but nothing has been written. Okay? The transfer has been transferred. I mean, there's been a transfer of property, and there's an unwritten agreement that's been entered into just by a mother or father communicating with this adult child who says, look, I'm going through a hard time, that money will be paid back to you, or you've transferred the property to me so that I can get some money because I have to have title to the property to be able to get this money, this loan, but you'll get it back in due course. The house there later on is never returned, and the child then, who is sometimes with a spouse who is encouraging that person, that older child, not to give back the money, we need it better. And so the money is not given back. And who is left in the vulnerable situation of trying to go after a return of money, a return of property? The older person, who now no longer has an asset or has diminished money, and certainly doesn't have the money in general, or the time, because life is short, or the emotional well-being, just in general, or wish to go against a child and take them to task. And when I say take to task, it doesn't mean running off to court, but often that means having to go to court to have the matter turned around. And in many of my cases, of course, I try to mediate these matters and bring to the older child's attention what the undertaking was, that the money was going to be given back and must be given back, but is not. And what does it do? It completely destroys a family's ability to go forward as a unit, and the other children who have been left out and who will have nothing in favor of this one child who has grabbed it all. Does that go on? Every day, over and over and over again. So when you have some kind of transaction with a member of the family, make sure that it is in written form, that you are dealing in a very professional manner, a very loving but a professional manner, in making sure that all is covered in terms of whatever you do. Because it's not just for you, it's also for all of your other children and grandchildren that you want to have protection. And of course for your own needs, should you have care needs or residence needs down the line. So security, of course, is something that we really want to promote, but it's very, very difficult in these situations. The person is in a vulnerable situation. We are all vulnerable at different times. We all, every single one of us, no matter, regardless of age, are vulnerable. What makes us vulnerable? Lack of information. Okay? How many of us at a certain age are not technical wizards, as kids are at age 4, 5, and 6? Okay? That's information. We don't have it to the same degree as those who've been growing up. People who need to have some help with the financial matters. That doesn't mean you're incapable. It means that you just need to be dealing with the proper people. People say, well, I don't have the money to be engaging a planner or a chartered accountant, public accountant, but yes, you do have the ability to sit with your bank. There are many, many clinics who can sit and give information on these matters. People don't know that there are these other recourses that are available to us all. We have to have some support on various different topics, but we're all vulnerable. And certainly we're made more vulnerable, of course, as we age, but it's only one of many vulnerabilities that we can all experience in our life many, many times over. So we try to indicate to lawyers and judges and social workers and doctors that we have to be aware of the fact that we're all vulnerable. We're just trying to help a particular kind of vulnerability that occurs, as people age. And of course, the situations that can occur, as they do all the time. Finally, autonomy is our number one credo in this field of law. Poorly understood and poorly applied. And yet it's right in our civil code, and it's not understood by professionals. And I'm including notaries, lawyers, and judges. It is so very important that we keep that in our mind. It's not just for people who are healthy. It's not just for people who are capable. It's for anyone who has any kind of problem. And certainly I'm thinking of the people who are the most vulnerable, those who do have advanced incapacity. People will say, and it used to be, that you could be determined as totally incapable. And I said, there is no way that anyone is totally incapable. Yet we had this category of removing all rights from a person because they were totally incapable. That is only changed last November. Only changed last November. Yet it was in the law. It was certainly law before. But because we had a category of what was called curatorship, we now have banned that. It is no longer existing. Since November 1st of last year, we have tutorship, which was there before, as a category of protection for someone, but it was modulated. It was adapted to the abilities of the person. And when I say autonomy, what our provision in our civil code, which is 257 of the civil code, it says that every decision to be taken by anyone who is a representative of someone who has the need for a formal representation, and that includes tutorship, someone who's acting as a tutor, that is somebody assigned by the court to act, okay, after having a family council, or a mandate of protection, which is a contract that you have signed and then it's given effect to by the court. In each of these categories of representation, you who are the representative, mandatory or tutor, you have an obligation to take account of and preserve, safeguard, the word is safeguard, sauvegarder, to safeguard the autonomy of that person. And that is being given lip service, because there are just far too many people who come into these roles without understanding or knowing what the obligations of their roles are, which are to include the person, support the person, help the person, dignify the person, and make sure that you safeguard their autonomy. What has been added in November as well is something, again, that is fundamental, just common sense, is that you honor the person's wishes and their preferences. Now, I have met people who know nothing about the law and yet have honored their parents or, a family member or someone at the highest degree of respect. I said, you don't know the law, but you are exercising the law at the highest level possible. To absolutely respect and include that person in everything, regardless of how much that person is diminished. And that is so, unfortunately, in my business, it's rare. But I'm only dealing with problems and issues. I would love to know that there are, and it's pervasive across the country, that people are doing the right thing in terms of caring for, supporting, helping, just helping others. Because that's the level that we need. Recently I was speaking at a court, and I asked a judge to take account of the wishes of this person who actually had some advanced incapacity and needed certainly to have someone to administer and make sure that all of bills were paid and certainly money was still properly overseen that was invested, certainly. However, I said, there's some conflict in the family. And it's very important that that get resolved, because this man wants to have both of his children involved in his life, not just the person who has been named, but both of them. Now, they may not get along in everything, or far from everything, but there's got to be some way that there is a protocol of how they deal with each other in the interest of their father, because their father wants them both to be involved. And the judge said, well, we haven't got there yet. We're not yet at that point, but that's not my role. My role is only to determine whether the representative is a competent person and that the person has incapacity. Those are my two roles. And I said, with all due respect, Monsieur le Juge, our obligation is to take account of all of the situation of the person and make sure that we are respecting and promoting, safeguarding that person's autonomy, and his autonomy and his wishes are that both children would be involved. So there's going to be a method that allows us to make sure that there's some kind of agreement, engagement in French, that will allow for them to have a way to work together. Does not mean both need to be the legal representative, but both need to be involved, and they need to be involved daily with this man if he's going to be happy and have all that he needs. So certainly there's all kinds of, I will be going to court and I will be arguing that again to this judge, but I will have many cases that are telling this over and over again, that we all have to pay attention to being very respectful and inclusive of no matter how much that person has declined, right to the end of their life, right to the last breath. Right to the last breath. When my mother was dying, and she died, thank goodness, in a most deserving way possible, and that was very quickly within a couple of weeks, but where she had no pain. She was in what we call a rapid fire cancer. Never heard of rapid fire cancer, but she had a rapid fire cancer, was without pain. And when the doctors said, well, we can do chemotherapy and we can extend her life by 2 or 3 months, I said, well, what is that going to buy her? I mean, this is a lady whose life has been wonderful. She has been an angel, and she knows exactly what to do. If you would tell her, she will make her own decision about what should be done. Okay. But I said, her life is organized. Everything is organized in her life. So please, just ask her. And as soon as she was told what was at issue here, because of course nobody wanted to tell her, including my father, because for fear that she would know, I said, no, she certainly, she was a registered nurse. She knows how to deal with these things. Tell her and let her make her own decision. Even though she was quite sick, I mean, she was on medication and so forth. But she said, take all of these things out. She just wanted to have, her last days to be peaceful. And she spent the next 2 weeks greeting all these people, including her great-grandchildren, coming to have tea on her bed. She had a wonderful end of life, but she called the shots. And that I say, despite the difficulties or maybe the temporary, loss of all of your abilities at a certain point, you have to honor those abilities that remain. Write down. And if the person, for example, is in a coma, what do? You put forward what that person would want if that person had been capable. Not what you want or you think is best, but what were the values of that person in life, and what would that person have said if she were capable of speaking. often it is to bring the doctors in as well on that, but certainly it's knowing what the values of the person are. And how do you find out what the values and wishes of the person are? Communicate, communicate, communicate. And I certainly hope that we all communicate with our children, and in the absence of children, with our friends, our trusted persons who are in our lives, and that you write down what you want. Often when you go to a notary to draw up these powers of attorney and mandates, and I will finish off with some of the problems that we have with powers of attorney and mandates. But in that document, that is the secondary piece of, there's a power of attorney and then there's a mandate of protection, and they're all put in the same document, is that you have a portion that can be aligned or attributed to end of life, what you would want, okay? And that should be much more fulsome than it is currently. There are usually some standard remarks that are written right from the civil code, and they don't give much flesh to the bones, okay? They don't really speak very, very much to this. But encourage the notary you visit to add a lot more and speak about this. The same thing for your wills. Make sure that you communicate. Most people will say, nay, 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 nay. No, these are private, and if I bring it up, it will be causing all kinds of problems. You'll be surprised how much that communication, especially if there are persons in your life who are being treated differently, and there's a good reason for them being treated differently. If they don't know, it's a terrible legacy to leave to that person if one is being treated differently from another. And yet it could be a perfectly valid reason one is being treated differently than another. But if you don't communicate it, you leave that person always questioning after you've died. So I'm not the only one who says communicate, communicate, communicate. It's really a litany of remarks that we make all the time, those of us who are working in the fields of later life planning, that we communicate to our family as much as possible, and make sure that the notary or the person that you've gone to for putting together a legal document really puts this into the document as well. Some of the roles that the person is going to play, who would be the representative. Why not put them in the document, attached to the document, and invite that person to be, as soon as they are going to be in a position to need to be involved, to come back to the notary and find out what their role is all about, what their responsibilities are all about. There is much, much more education that we can provide. I'd love to have a day annually where we lawyers would be communicating some information on some of these basics about planning in the case of advanced care, later life, legal documents. And it is something that I keep promoting, but not yet has occurred. But we should be doing this, not just in communities, but across Quebec, that we can be giving information. We have once a year in April, persons can come into Complexe des Jardins. They can ask questions at no cost. But it's just not enough. And it's not focused necessarily on these very growing older population who needs to have information. So I think that at this point, I've given you, I guess, a pep talk on these matters that we face, but the financial exploitation matter is not just the only matter that we have. It's just the basic caring by professionals, not just everyday family, but professionals as well, to care for people and recognize every little ounce, sometimes ounce of ability that that person has, and give effect to that ability if we're going to secure the person's rights. And the strength in it is my giving conferences or writing. I do an awful lot of writing as well about these issues. That is intended to strengthen. And certainly we need some adaptations of our law in terms of giving some guidance to matters that are just in the civil code, but nobody knows really how to read those provisions. We need to have some guidance for certain matters that are really critical to this field. And that is how we can strengthen. Not just in suggesting new law, because in November of last year we got new law. But that new law is old law. It was just reformulated. Okay? Yes, we got rid of curatorship. We removed curatorship, recognizing finally that people are not totally incapable. Unless they're in a coma or in a vegetative state, they are not totally incapable. That we have that obligation to honor and dignify every person, even if that person is totally incapable and in a coma. But nevertheless, we have the obligation to pull out and preserve and try to investigate it while the person is healthy, as to what they would want, and make sure every aspect of that person's wishes is given effect to. It's been a pleasure. Okay. Thank you.